Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar here at Local U. I have with me today David Mihm and Greg Sterling. And if you're looking at the screen going, wait, Joy, where's Mike? Mike unfortunately couldn't be with us today. He had a death in the family. So Greg was so nice to step in and try and fill his space here. I'm going to give these guys a quick second to introduce themselves, but I wanted to let people know, because I don't even know if Greg knows this. Greg Sterling is the one that gave me my very first speaking gig in the SEO world. Literally. Like, I don't even know if I'd be here if it wasn't for Greg, because he took a chance on me, and I remember being so freaking nervous to speak at SMX all those years ago. So thank you, Greg. Go ahead and
Yeah,
tell
no,
everyone who you are.
it's funny. I was just thinking that, and I remember that panel, and I thought this person looks interesting, and let's put her on when you were back at Impreza. And it turned out to be you were great, and obviously your success is a statement of how I recognize I'm like a Hollywood talent agent, and
Yeah.
so.
You're like the Simon Cowell of SEO, maybe? Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I would accept that, but something like that. But thank you. Yeah,
Awesome.
happy to be
And
here.
for people that maybe don't know who you are, can you tell everyone what you're up to these days, what you're doing?
So the short version is that I wrote for Search Engine Land for about 14 years with Barry. Barry has gone on to great heights, soaring far above where he was. And I've been in the local search space in various capacities for about 25 years, unbelievably. I'm working with David and Mike on Near Media. I have other projects too, but local SEO is not local SEO, but sort of local search broadly defined has been kind of my area of focus for my entire career in this digital marketing world. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
David, I mean, if you don't know who David is, he's like one of the OGs of local search. Like, you can't not know who David is unless you're new to the industry. But I will let David also tell you a little bit about what he's up to these days as well.
Well, I also, like you, Joy, I also met Greg for the first time at SMX. I don't know if it was the same SMX event, but back in San Francisco. I'm not giving quite as much credit for where I am today.
No,
You,
no, no.
you
I
might
had
have,
nothing to
but
do with David's success.
but I've been in local search for, 20 years at this point. That is horrible to say. And have been friends with Mike and Greg pretty much that whole time. I think I might have been one of the first commenters on Mike's blog way back in the day. And I got my start doing small business website design, and just sort of saw the, I don't even know, amplification, I guess, of what are now Google business profiles when the local pack first came out, and thought, man, this is a real thing. Google's really putting a lot of resources into this. Arguably a bigger percentage of their resources in 2007 or 8 than it is today. But just from there, I was kind of hooked on local, and I started Get Listed as a co-founder, and sold that to Moz and worked at Moz for a few years. Did another startup in email marketing called Tidings, and sold that. And I'm now back in local search full time. You couldn't keep me away. Working with Mike and Greg on Near Media, and increasingly we're doing a lot of behavioral research into how people actually use Google. And which is super fascinating, and excited to maybe share a little bit about what we're doing with the audience today. So.
Awesome. Yeah, behavioral signals are becoming a bigger discussion. We got a lot of questions about it at Local U this week. And one of the things I think that's kind of brought it to the front lines is the algorithm leak, right? The thing that Rand and Mike King talked about, which we interviewed them earlier this year in this series. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. They had a really amazing amount of thought and just commentary on some of the stuff that was in that document. But one of the big trends was consumer behavior, like clicks, things like that, have a huge impact on how businesses appear on Google, how visible they are, things like ranking. So I know David came prepared today with a bunch of research that he wanted to show everybody. Please do ask questions, leave them in the comments. When David's done, I will go through them. We want to make sure that we prioritize the questions you guys have for them. So leave them in the comments as he's sharing, and then when he's done, we will go to Q&A, and I will make sure to ask him all of those. So David, I'll send it over to you to kick it off and show us what you have.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Joy. And this will be pretty quick, but this is actually hot off the press. We have not shared. We published some of this research on our blog or on our analysis section last week, and we'll be publishing part 2 on Monday. So this is brand new, and we have not presented this anywhere. So I thought, we've got a good opportunity here with local search enthusiasts to kind of share, I think, some pretty interesting data about hotel search specifically in the EU and how that compares to a couple of other categories that we've researched. And we really believe that understanding search behavior vertical by vertical is essential if you really do want to optimize your local search investment and optimize your local search strategy. We've seen significant variation from vertical to vertical. If you're not familiar with our research, we ask hundreds of real consumers, typically 200 or 300 per project, to do real searches on their desktop or mobile device. We get their permission to record their screens and their voice as they sort of narrate their search experience. And then we come back and we aggregate and we analyze all of that data and hopefully come up with some interesting conclusions. So our most recent study, again, which we just published last week, or maybe it's now 10 days ago or so, was about hotel search in Europe. If you're not familiar, there is a relatively new law in the European Union called the Digital Markets Act that the UK is likely to adopt a similar stance to this and is being studied as kind of a potential model by antitrust regulators here in the US. And for search marketers, the key thing here is that the key provision in the DMA is a provision against Google self-preferencing with its own results. So we kind of got interested in this, particularly in the EU research, when we saw Google's response to the DMA, which they came out with in March, largely driven by this new unit, which I've highlighted here on the following screen. And this is in Spanish, sitios de lugares, places, sites. This was essentially Google's attempt to comply with the DMA. And so we saw this, Mike and Greg and I, we saw this introduction and we thought, that's interesting. Certainly it seems to be fairly prominent in search results. We wondered if people were actually engaging with it. So that's really what drove kind of the research in the EU generally. And we thought we'd apply our same methodology that we use for our commercial clients historically in the US. We thought we'd apply that same methodology here in Europe. And so we just did a big study of 300 users in Germany, France, and Spain of how they search for hotels and tried to answer some of those questions about what they engage with and how is Google sort of, I won't say controlling behavior, but steering behavior with the way that they construct search results. And so what we found was, we do see this places, sites element frequently in the first and second position. We also see the hotel finder, the equivalent of the local pack, in the first or second position quite often. So from that standpoint, you might be able to say that Google's making a good faith effort. They're showing this thing very prominently to searchers. We actually found that they're showing it more prominently, at least with these 300 searchers, much smaller sample, but sort of real users who are, we directed them essentially, hey, you're looking to book a hotel room for a long weekend in either Paris and Rome, and you go to Google to start your search. So we're sort of prompting them to be a little bit more transactional, potentially, than the data set that SEO Clarity looked at earlier this year. They found this thing was showing up only about a quarter of the time, and that Google Hotels was showing up actually way more frequently, 70% of the time in the top position. So don't know exactly why. There's a little bit more of a discrepancy in how often they saw it in the top position, but we saw it in the top position, significantly. What about clicks? So you'd think typically that something in occupying the first organic position for a pretty transactional query would get a lot of clicks. In fact, SEO Clarity predicted that there'd be a pretty substantial drop-off in click-through rate for hotels in that hotel finder. Their Google business profiles essentially would see a significant drop in click-through rate. And we can't speak to necessarily what it was prior to the introduction of this element, but what we found in hotels is very consistent with what we've seen in other verticals in Europe, which is basically nobody engages with it. So even though this thing is really, an appealing visual, Google is putting it fairly high up the page. What's happening is that as soon as users see that big map and they see those Google business profiles with stars and reviews, that's really where their eye gets drawn. And so if you look at this, we see basically that the Places Sites module was visible about half the time to our searchers, but that engagement was almost nothing. It was less than 2% of all clicks went to that Places Sites module. It just doesn't get clicked on. And this is a comparison. The graphic here on the left is from our research in restaurants earlier this year. where you can see we saw a very similar lack of engagement with that module. Now, the difference here in these two verticals, if you can kind of get a sense from the bars that are further to the left, the difference is the hotel finder was far less visible than the local pack was for restaurant searches. And that was very, very surprising. Why wasn't the hotel finder visible more often, or at least as often as the local pack in restaurants? And the reason was, in hotel search, so many consumers never scrolled far enough down past the ads where they would see either the Places Sites module or the hotel finder. And we saw in particular Booking.com absolutely dominating ad results, and consumers clicking on Booking.com an incredible amount of time. This was totally shocking to at least me. I don't want to necessarily speak for Greg, but totally shocking, as I'm not sure I've ever made a single reservation on Booking.com, but it is absolutely massive in Europe. And we saw consumers, express a strong preference to Booking, certainly via their ad, their ad bidding, as well as some of their organic results. And that was very surprising. Booking.com is, go ahead, Greg. Sorry. Yep.
So I just wanted to interject. Sorry to interrupt you, David. This speaks to the power of brand. I mean, Booking.com is a much stronger brand in Europe than it is in North America, as David said. But against the backdrop of this larger conversation about Google and brands and users responding to brands, this is a pretty powerful illustration of that.
Definitely. And I was just going to say that Booking actually notified the European Commission that it is likely to be designated as a gatekeeper because of as is Google and Apple and all these other big tech companies, because of its revenues and because of its installed user base in the EU. So what we're seeing here, in case the title didn't necessarily give it away, is really you have two gatekeepers, Google and Booking, sort of working together to box out everybody else from hotel search results. And Google has a vested interest in Booking, sort of continuing its dominant market position, because it's monetizing hotel search so heavily. So we saw 53% of all clicks on mobile devices going to ads, which was way, way higher than we've seen in any other category. On desktop search, the sort of click distribution looked similar to what we've seen in other categories, but there's almost no organic tail, right? There's basically organic websites past the fourth position got almost no clicks. And this is very different behavior than what we've seen in other categories, and especially in other categories in the United States. So in healthcare, for example, this is from a report we did last year. We see a pretty significant, this is a pretty fat tail of clicks via organic search to websites, well down past the second, third, fourth position, very different from what we see in European hotels. And when it was visible, when consumers did scroll far enough past the ads to encounter the hotel finder, it actually captured the majority of all clicks, which again, this is pretty consistent with what we've seen in other categories. I'll just note again that Places Sites module, even if consumers scroll far enough down the page to see it, they almost never click on it, less than 2% of the time. And we did see one substantial difference in terms of the country by country behavior. Spanish users were far less likely to click Google Business Profiles than they were Booking.com results. And interestingly enough, Spain has actually sued Booking.com for antitrust behavior. So as Greg was just saying a little while ago, this speaks to kind of the power of brand potentially earning Booking.com these clicks from Google. It appears to have a much stronger market position in Spain than it does in France and Germany, although it's strong in all three countries.
One additional comment: in some of these videos that I watched, when somebody would put Booking in the search box, not Booking.com, but Booking, just the word Booking, Google would interpret that as a request for Booking.com, the website, which was, I thought, very interesting. Sort of a generic keyword, and they're sending it to the brand.
So within the hotel finder, we also saw, I thought, a pretty interesting behavioral pattern in terms of where people were clicking inside of either the local pack, hotel pack, or the hotel finder. And the interesting thing was how many people engaged with the map when they were looking for a hotel. This is wildly different behavior than we've seen in any other category, including restaurants, where you might think location is, almost as sensitive as it would be in hotels, or almost as impactful as it would be in hotels. But we saw tons and tons and tons of users engaging with the map. And this basically says, hey, if you have a strong visually impactful Google business profile and a strong review profile on your GBP, consumers are likely to encounter it if it's in the general area that they're looking to stay in. And so I think that this speaks to less about rankings and more about presence for hoteliers in Europe and potentially in other markets as well. Again, there's a very different sort of click-through curve, click distribution anyway, than what we've seen in the US in healthcare and in legal. There we've seen basically, if you're not in the top 3, you're going to have a harder chance of capturing clicks. The map usage is on these slides way down here at the end. But basically, there's a strong benefit to people ranking in the top 3 in the pack or the finder in healthcare and legal. Not so much, as you can see, in hotels, that the map is really by far the dominant position, quote unquote, that people are engaging with. And so what are the attributes of hotels that drove consumer choice? And this, we'll talk a little bit about reviews here. And I know, Joy, you had a couple questions around consumer review usage that we'll get to. So what are the attributes that people are mentioning as they're going through and selecting a hotel, selecting a room to book? And you can see there that there's kind of 4 main drivers of choice: price, not surprisingly; ratings and reviews, number 2; proximity and location, number 3; and then the 4th position, I sort of added a bar here because photos, if you look at consumer engagement and mentions of photos on aggregators, on Google business profiles, on a hotel's website, and in ads, photos are actually the number 1 driver of consumer bookings. In this case, aggregator photos, largely on booking.com, were in the 4th position. So really the big 4: price, ratings and reviews, proximity to tourist destinations, and photos specifically on booking.com. Those are the big 4 drivers. So this is kind of pretty similar to what we've seen in some other verticals. Restaurants in particular, we saw ratings and reviews number 1, photos number 2, and in restaurants, menu actually being the 3rd most influential attribute. But here's probably something, Joy, that I think you mentioned you heard us present last year that was surprising. We heard reviews, I think they were number 2 or something in terms of the most influential attribute that was driving choice. But of the people who mentioned reviews as a driver of their decision, only about half actually took the time to read any text of reviews. So people are using reviews, they're using star ratings and the review volume to kind of make very quick snap decisions in this exercise of trying to choose a hotel. And they're not actually necessarily looking at what people are saying. They're just using those star ratings and volume. And incidentally, I know we're probably going to talk about Yelp some in the Q&A as well. So Yelp has said for years, our reviews are better because they have these, they're all very, very deep. People spend time, put a lot of time into writing them, and our consumers are engaging with them. We just don't see that behavior happening on Google. And so the star ratings and the volume, I think, the shorter reviews, better presentation, and I would argue that Google is doing with reviews, is really what's driving consumer behavior. So we've seen this, like, reviews being very important to consumer decisions, but very few people actually reading reviews. We've seen this time and again, vertical after vertical, Irish restaurants, US healthcare, US self-storage. We've seen even a smaller percentage of people reading reviews of the ones that mention how important they were. That said, consumers do have high rating and volume expectations. In hotels, actually less high than in some other categories, but these are the ratings here are the gold bars, and the review volumes are sort of the dark green. So on hotels that are getting clicks on Google, basically you got to have a 4-star rating if you're going to get considered as a hotel to stay at. And you probably need at least 500 reviews if people are going to consider you. That's a very high number. Obviously, hotels are one of the verticals with probably the highest aggregate review volume in total. And then on aggregators, which most aggregators in Europe that we saw anyway, actually have a 10-point rating scale. So that's why they're sort of separate here. So if you normalize it, though, you're basically looking at 4 stars out of 5 or 8 out of 10 on an aggregator, and actually a much higher volume of reviews on aggregators than on Google. So couple thousand reviews is kind of the benchmark if you're looking at people choosing a hotel on an aggregator versus maybe a couple hundred on Google. And this is also somewhat consistent with what we saw in healthcare here in the US. We did see a little bit higher bar, a little higher threshold for people choosing a doctor. 4.6 stars for a clinic and 4.8 for a provider on Google, much lower number of reviews. Obviously, there just aren't as many in healthcare. But when you saw people choosing a doctor from a directory, again, very high expectation, 4.9, same star rating that they expect on Google, but a much higher bar, much higher threshold in terms of the number of reviews that people expect to see on a directory like HealthGrades or ZocDoc or something like that. So qualitative takeaway here, certainly in hotels, directories, or what the EU regulators refer to as aggregators, directories still matter a lot. 62% of all clicks in our EU hotel study went to aggregators, Booking being the primary one. In the restaurant category in Ireland, 33% of all clicks went to directories. TripAdvisor eating almost all of those in the restaurant vertical in Ireland. US healthcare, about 30% of all clicks going to directories, ZocDoc being the biggest beneficiary. And in self-storage, 18%, Sparefoot being the primary driver of directory usage. So these are all much higher numbers than I would have expected prior to doing any of this research. But just goes to show that directories do still matter for consumer engagement, but you don't see the horizontal directories here showing up anywhere. So the Yelps of the world, the city searches, they just don't get the same level of engagement I think that they probably used to back when all three of us were kind of getting started. And I think that you really need to pay attention to your directory presence on the sites that consumers are engaging with, the ones that are ranking really well in your category, and the ones that do show up in consumer research that people are actually clicking on.
Right. We continue to have this debate about the value of citations and how many citations do you need and where should the citations be. And I think what David just said is the right answer. Directories matter, but they have to be specific directories in particular verticals. And so you really need to pay attention to that. Sort of spray and pray is a kind of waste of time and money now. But don't dismiss directories, because our data show that they can be very impactful on consumer decision making in certain cases.
Yep. And the other main takeaway is not something, unfortunately, that we can share. These were for the most part, studies that we did for clients. But we hear some amazing takeaways for businesses to improve their messaging and positioning, the themes that they should be emphasizing to potential customers and potential clients. Right down to the headline they use on their homepage or the call to action that they use, in their header. But there are some amazing takeaways that you get from listening to hundreds of people interacting with search results and interacting with business websites. And so to me, this is like also, the search data is super interesting, but from as a marketer, the qualitative data around how consumers perceive businesses like mine, or in some cases mine, we have seen our own clients getting clicks naturally as well, is just really interesting and can, I think, be used to really improve marketing overall.
I can add one thing to that without revealing any trade secrets or anything. In healthcare, this was especially pronounced. We saw people looking at pictures and making comments pretty consistently. There were just certain consistent reactions to images, to descriptions, to providers that were really pretty eye-opening and reflective of consumers' thinking, and which varies by category because they do use different criteria depending on the category. So I totally agree with what David is saying. It's at least as interesting as the click data.
Great. So just to summarize, and again, this is half of this has already been published on our site, and the other half will be going up on Monday. But in the EU, Google Business Profiles, the Google Hotel Finder, and Booking are kind of the only two games in town. Google's big DMA change, that Places Sites module, might as well be invisible. It's getting almost no clicks in every vertical we look at. Incidentally, we have a study coming out that Greg will be presenting with our research partner Cinda in Croatia in October. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I definitely encourage you to sign up for that Cinda conference. It's a great conference. Mike, Greg, and I have all spoken at it previously, and just some really smart people. And I think you're going to get some interesting data from Greg in that presentation.
Right. It's an excuse to go to Croatia.
Great excuse to go to Croatia in October. So yeah, just as the weather's getting crappy here, it's like getting perfect over there. So the other couple takeaways, the importance of ranking in GBP very significantly. So we saw, almost no impact of ranking in the top 3 here in hotels because so many people were using the map. That's not necessarily true in the other verticals we looked at. And I think is something that you should be studying in your own vertical in terms of where consumers are actually engaging. And reviews are critical, but maybe not in the way that you might think. People are using the ratings and the volume of reviews to make very quick decisions and also disqualify businesses that don't meet their internal thresholds. And they're not necessarily taking the time to read deep reviews. Where consumers read reviews, incidentally, we do see sort of a split of people who are actually looking for negative reviews to understand why people aren't having a good experience. But generally speaking, again, roughly two thirds of folks, sometimes as much as 4 out of 5, won't take the time to read a review. They're just making a split second decision based on the stars and the volume. So we do this research for clients. This is kind of our bread and butter at Near Media. Would love to work with any of you guys who are listening on the call. It is not cheap. This is very labor intensive, both watching the videos and doing analysis. So probably not for the average small business who's watching, but if you're with an enterprise brand and you're spending money on ads and you've got a multi-million-dollar SEO program, we think this would be a great investment to understand really how consumers are engaging with results in your vertical. So thanks so much for listening and watching. Really looking forward to all the Q&A today, but thanks for indulging me as we shared our hot off the presses most recent study.
Oh my goodness, I have so many questions. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to really quickly give a shout out to our sponsor. So this webinar is actually sponsored by a company that is owned by a friend of mine called Nerdy Nuts. So Nerdy Nuts, I'm going to put it like this, is a peanut butter company. If you haven't heard of them, they are kind of like the Ben and Jerry's of peanut butter. So when you go and see there's like millions of different flavors for ice cream and you kind of get to pick and choose ones, that's essentially what they did, but with peanut butter. So you can put this peanut butter on toast and eat it, but honestly, I eat it straight from the jar. It's kind of like getting your sugar fix for when you're craving chocolate or something. Instead of having a Reese's, I now eat this. This flavor that I'm holding up here is caramel apple blondie. This one is fudgin' cake. These are amazing. My kids actually had to hide them in my closet because my kids were eating them all. And I was like, I need to have these jars for this webinar. So anyways, I'll put them back out. My kids can continue to eat them. But we have a promo code here. If you haven't tried Nerdy Nuts, definitely check it out. Using the code Sterling Sky will get you 10% off. My apologies in advance for the addiction that I'm starting here, which I currently have myself. They have about 300 flavors, I think, something like that. So you never get bored. They're constantly coming out with new ones that are themed, and it's just, yeah, it's a great gift too.
And for the marketers in the audience, it's a great marketing story as well. It's really interesting to read up on it because the guy who started it was an SEO and has done just a tremendous job with marketing and branding.
Yeah.
And he's super nice on top of it. He's not like a certain owner of a certain social media platform.
We actually had him on the Near Media podcast, and I can provide a link to that if people are interested. It's a little while ago, but I'll give you a link if you want to see that.
Yeah, definitely check out Nerdy Nuts. Their stuff will not disappoint. It's very yummy, and kids also love it. We use it for our Christmas gifts every year at Sterling Sky. So staff, we order tons of peanut butter, and it's always a hit. All right, so back to these questions. David, you had a slide that I don't know if you can pull it up again, but it talked about the click-through rate based on position for the local pack, and I think it was for healthcare. That is something I get asked all the time, and there's like virtually no studies about it. So I just wanted to clarify the difference between the clicks on position 1, 2, or 3. How much difference does it make if you are number 1 versus 2 versus 3? Can you address that? I
do have the slide pulled up, Richard. I don't know if you want to switch back to that view, but that's this one here. Perfect. I think is what you're asking about, right, Joy? So this is I don't know if you guys can quite see what the labels are here at the bottom, but pack 1, pack 2, pack 3, finder 1, finder 2, finder 3. So in the aggregate, certainly the top position in the pack is the place you want to be in healthcare, right? Whereas in hotels in Europe, actually the second position in the pack got more clicks than the top one. The map was just getting, so much engagement. Sorry to go back to this one. And I think in healthcare, what we saw actually, the most interesting takeaway for us was there actually was a pretty long tail of clicks within the local finder, so past the top 3 results. And what we saw was there were fewer physicians with any reviews, let alone good review profiles. And so consumers were scrolling pretty far down before they found either a clinic or a physician with a high enough star rating and enough reviews to give them confidence that this would be somebody they should investigate further. So we did see a pretty strong tail in the healthcare vertical in the US, even though almost no one was using the map to choose their doctor.
And images was a factor there as well.
That's right.
People were there were not a lot of profiles that had images on them, and people were scrolling because they really wanted to see the provider, the practitioner. So they were scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, not only for reviews but also to see pictures where they existed, thumbnails.
So specifically for the legal one, the lower positions there, I'm actually shocked they get any clicks, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
that seems interesting. What was it that you heard as far as like what did the top lawyers not have that those positions had?
I would say it was reviews primarily as well. And I think that if I recall, there were no one on this call who's in or on this webinar who's working in legal would be surprised with, but there were definitely like very spammy titles frequently ranking in the top 3. And so people, I think, were looking for legit looking law firms just based on the business name and the way that they describe their business. We did see some engagements with the services tab in legal, if I recall. But I think primarily the story is reviews and even a surprising amount of proximity. People did want to be able to go into an office, that wasn't 2 hours away, that was 15 minutes down the road or something like that.
So wait, David, you're telling me that if your firm name is Personal Jeweler Chicago, that is not as good as Mihm and Sterling?
That would be my advice, regardless of the rank. I think what this shows is regardless if that's going to help you rank, that what's going to actually draw consumers in is something you should be equally, if not more, concerned with. So,
For sure.
Did you want to say something about the schema?
That's a good point. So we didn't. That's totally separate from this slide, but a really, really good point. We saw a couple of law firms who were not exactly playing by Google's guidelines with respect to using product review schema on their websites. And so they were getting the gold stars with thousands and thousands and thousands of reviews showing up alongside their organic results. And those organic results, even if they were well down the page, drew people's eyes and drew people's clicks absolutely immediately. So at least as far as we can tell, the risk seems to be worth the reward in the legal vertical for using product review schema against Google's guidelines. Google does not seem to be hiding that review schema, let alone penalizing it.
Yeah, no, I've found the same thing for sure. So lots of things that Google says not to do that work really well and don't seem to have any downside. All right, we have a lot of audience questions. I'm going to try and get to them here. So you talked about booking and how when people searched booking, they were actually looking for booking.com. Do you have any idea like how that's compares to in the US? Like, is it just because booking is just so much more popular over there than over here?
Yes.
I would say so. I think we would be really excited to do this exact study in the US. If there's an enterprise hotel brand listening, we'd be very curious to do it over here. I don't think you'd see anywhere. You certainly wouldn't see anywhere close to the level of clicks on booking.com. Particularly, I think it's entirely possible that you'd see a similar breakdown of aggregators versus or directories versus individual hotels. But I don't think booking.com would have the same brand strength here in the US.
Somebody else was just wanting to make sure they understood like the way that you guys measured these clicks. Could you just quickly brief us on that?
We watch hundreds of people doing searches on Google and clicking results and tabulating those clicks in a spreadsheet as they occur. So it's a very manual process.
Yeah. Yes, it's handcrafted. There are no machines. There's no AI involved. It's David, Mike, and me watching hours and hours and hours of video and recording it by hand in a spreadsheet.
My goodness. All right. Some things that AI hasn't been able to do yet, eh? Okay.
Well, so that's what we were really excited because there were some indications that AI, some of these AI companies were able to sort of watch videos and be able to sort of, tell what was happening in the videos. But I don't think that we'd really have to get heavily involved in training those models. And frankly, at least at this point, the time investment doesn't seem worth it. So.
You guys mentioned Yelp. I just thought this was funny. Yelp is trash. A bunch of thugs masquerading as a business. I don't know if you have anything to say about Yelp. Maybe we'll leave that for. I have a question here.
Mike, yes.
Take would be matured somewhat since their early days, and I think that they are a real business at this point. Mike certainly has had his own run-ins with their CEO on social media, but
I thought you were going to say Mike would trash them, but he would have a measured response, let's say, these days, more measured.
Question here from Jeffrey. You guys planning on publishing the U.S. healthcare numbers that you know?
We are not. This was for a client, and and there's, I don't even know how many slides, 200 slides for that client that we have not shared here. And so we're very eager to work with any healthcare companies who want to hire us to do this research for themselves. I will say we only looked at 2 specialties. And so it's entirely possible that as you get into more acute specialties, that search behavior looks different.
For sure. And,
I mean, and
feel
that's,
free
and
to.
that, go ahead, Joey.
Oh, no, I was going to say, feel free to send them the link to this video if they're, wanting to see the visuals and stuff, because obviously it's available here, and this video will be on our YouTube channel after.
We have shared, like David did in this presentation, we have shared high level sort of excerpts from the research, but we've never shared the complete study, and we can't publish it because it was done, as David mentioned, for a client. But the sort of larger point, the meta point here is that all of these verticals and even sub verticals or subspecialties within these particular industries show slightly different behavior. There's a lot of nuance and a lot of, differences between regions. North America is different than Europe. Healthcare is different from storage, etc. So that's part of the point that we're making, is that you can't make a lot of generalizations about people, how people are going to behave. You can make some, but not to the degree that the industry often makes them.
This is a good question. I think this is from Carrie. Did you see what happened when there was like a big difference between like what the Google rating was versus other directories? I've actually seen this for a few businesses that are buying reviews. They're only buying them on Google, and all the other sites are like 1 star. Did you run into that at all?
It's very interesting. We do track the number of what we call sort of reputational follow-up searches, right? So if somebody sees a business on ZocDoc, for example, and does a search for them in Google, we would track that. We didn't see that many of those searches. I mean, it's like just a couple of % of searchers, at least in our studies, kind of conducted those follow-ups. So I don't know that we saw much evidence of like major discrepancies just based on what the consumers were watching were doing. Greg, do you have any?
Well, I would say that in the real world, depending on the purchase consideration, the category, people will do that. They will do comparisons. Yeah. They're partly, I think some of the Bright Local survey data showed that people will look at multiple sites as a way to address potential fraud. And so you'll see that kind of behavior in certain verticals and perhaps not as much in others. Healthcare certainly would be one potentially where people choosing a doctor is a very serious thing. And so you might have somebody looking on Google, looking on ZocDoc, looking on Health Grades to see if there's a consensus. Yep. But I'm speculating a little bit right now.
This is a good question here from Paul. Did you see any patterns with responding to reviews? Did that matter at all to the consumers looking?
I would say somewhat, but probably less than has been sold to businesses in the space generally. I think that again, given the behavior that we have seen somewhat consistently among the consumers who read reviews, a significant percentage of those are looking for negative reviews. They want to understand what people didn't like. And so in that context, I think that responding to negative reviews is a way to potentially win those people over, as long as your overall star rating is still okay. It's still above that sort of expected threshold. So from that standpoint, I do think that review responses could be persuasive. We hadn't tracked that specific thing in terms of a metric that we were looking at, consistently across all these studies. I don't recall it being, super substantial, just because the number of people reading reviews wasn't super substantial. So
what I would say is that it's absolutely essential for businesses to respond to negative reviews, just as a matter of customer experience, and now that behavioral signals are out in the open, who knows what impact that is sort of having. But I agree with David. Of the people that did, of the 30%, 30 to 40, 25 to 40% of people, depending on the category, that looked at actual review text, when there was a negative review, people did look closely at the business response, and that either allowed them to disqualify or continue with that business. And I heard people saying, "Oh, that's reasonable," or "Oh, I like that," or whatever. They were very engaged with those. But this is, again, sort of anecdotal. But it's absolutely essential that you have your clients, or you on their behalf, whoever's doing it, respond to negative reviews, just as a matter of sort of customer experience and perception, brand perception.
There is a question here just clarifying, you had a number displayed on there. Is that the cost basically that they'd be looking at for a study?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
And depending on how large the study is, it might be larger than that. Again, this is a very time-intensive sort of initiative. So 20,000 is kind of like we literally can't set up a study and watch all those videos and still, feed our families for less than that. But if you're interested, I think reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you, particularly if it's in a category. One thing that we've done in the past is spoken to a couple of sort of associations where they can sort of pool resources. And if you might be able to pool resources with another couple of folks that we've already talked to, and kind of make the cost worth it across, sort of splitting it up. So.
For sure. Somebody had a question about video. Is that something that you came up with or saw anything?
Yeah, we saw almost no impact of video in any of our verticals, Greg, that I can recall. Almost nobody clicked to YouTube. Yeah.
Well, the visual information is really important. So images, absolutely, 100%. People want to see the area around a business. They want to see interior shots. They want to see pictures of the providers, depends on the category. So images, 100%, 110%. In our context, we did not see tons and tons of engagement with video, but there is this sort of auto play feature that's eye-catching. And so maybe that has some impact on people's click-throughs, but just in our studies, we haven't seen a lot of, it's not the case that everybody uniformly has video. So we don't have a really sort of kind of A/B example to compare. It's just kind of ad hoc. Yeah.
And I would say anecdotally, just because I also do consulting in other categories, like I see YouTube results showing up much more frequently in other categories where I'm doing client work than I've seen in any of these verticals that we looked at for near media. So it may just be the case that YouTube hasn't ranked very well in the search results that our consumers are looking at, so that they haven't got very much engagement. But if they rank, it's possible they get a lot of engagement.
I can tell you this anecdotally. Well, I can tell you that YouTube is the number 2 search engine, right? So, people are going directly to YouTube to look for video in particular cases. And in one case where I was looking for a doctor, a primary care physician, I think I looked at video on maybe ZocDoc and maybe it was YouTube. I was looking specifically to get a sense of the personality of that person. This is just a focus group of one. So we're not dismissing video. We just haven't seen it in the context of Google research playing a huge role in decision making.
Yeah. And as I think that is partly just because we don't see YouTube ranking in the results that we're looking at. So.
Yeah, I can say with confidence, we've been spending a lot of time on our YouTube channel in the last 2 years, and it is a completely different beast. Like most of our views that we get from YouTube and stuff are driven from YouTube, not from Google, right? So it is, people want videos. They go to YouTube or they go to TikTok directly and search there. So I think it's not that videos don't matter. It's just they are such a different strategy than SEO and Google. There's very little overlap. Like it's kind of wild how different they are. Something you said, talk about ads. All right. So ads were 53% of mobile clicks. That stat blew my mind.
In hotels in Europe. Yes.
In hotels.
Yeah,
Typically,
for sure. Yeah.
In other categories, we've seen it as low as 4%, right?
But then there's also LSAs, which we should talk about. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, no, let's talk about LSAs. Have you guys looked at those? How do those compare with regular ads?
So in legal, in the US, again, this is a subcategory of legal, in the US, where LSAs are prevalent, for search results where an LSA appeared, they got 33% of all choices of attorney.
Not just clicks.
By LSAs.
Not just clicks.
Not just clicks, but choices of attorney, right? Who you'd call first. 33% came from LSAs. 33% from GBPs, 33% from organic.
And
our theory is because people don't know that LSAs are ads. And they're very prominent. They're very visually prominent.
Google
they're high
guarantee.
Right.
Or whatever.
Right. They have the badge, they have the trust badge, they have reviews, they have pictures. They're very high on the page, and people don't know their ads.
That's actually really awesome. This is one of those things that I think like businesses don't want to pay, but I would say like given all these studies, is it safe to say that you're more confident that people should be advertising and actually paying for ads on Google and not just putting all their money into SEO?
Depends on the category.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, you'd want to do the math, right, on like how much these things are and how many clicks you're getting or whatever. But I think it's pretty clear that you're not. I mean, you are potentially missing out on 33% of your prospective customer base if you're not in LSAs in legal.
I can say that comparing healthcare and legal and self-storage in the United States only, ads were much more, putting aside LSAs in legal, which we just talked about, ads were much more effective in self-storage than they were in healthcare and other general Google ads in legal. That's my recollection. David, correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong. But
I think
in
that's
self,
yeah, that's
you think
accurate.
that's right?
Yep.
Yeah, in self-storage, it's a kind of a quasi commodity, and people were much more receptive to ads in that category, whereas legal and healthcare are much higher consideration categories. So people would see a brand that they and brand was also quite significant in self-storage. They would see a brand like Public Storage or I'm even forgetting the brands, but there were a bunch of brands and they would click on them, and especially if they were ads at the top of the page. So it really is I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there are differences between these categories, very much so. But ads should be considered if in your category people are really responding to them.
Yeah, and I would say the thing that strikes me about ads, I mean, it's most obvious in hotels, but you see even our friend Rand, showing all of this clickstream data for searches. Generally, less than 1% of clicks go to ads, or whatever the number is, right? But it's always a much smaller percentage than what we see in our studies, and I think that's because our studies we are not asking people to do informational research at all. We are saying we're directing them, like, you're ready to book a hotel room, or you're dissatisfied with your doctor and you're trying to find a new one. We're telling them, like, you're looking for something, you're low funnel. And I think for low funnel searches that Google is capturing a lot higher percentage of clicks through ads than is reported more broadly in the SEO community. So.
Now, you talked about the power of branding, and I think this is another thing that is becoming more and more prevalent with the recent algorithm updates. The brands that are strong are just crushing it, right? Like, you look at Reddit, you look at Forbes, you look at brands that the average consumer actually knows. They're doing amazing, and the brands that don't have the average consumer know about them, they're just dying. And I know people are complaining about this in the SEO community. Personally, I don't think that's a problem. I actually think it's like Google's trying to give consumers what they want, and they're getting a lot of heat for it. And I'm maybe in a different camp than most SEOs on this, because I actually think that Google's doing the right thing, putting consumers first. Do you have any thoughts just on, if you're a small business and you're starting out, obviously this means you need more than just SEO. What would you say to a small business in that scenario?
Well, I would say I think it's a little bit. I don't necessarily disagree with you that generally brands are okay, but I do think it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy on Google's part, or a self-reinforcing cycle, because at least in hotels, there are no small directories, or certainly almost no independent hotels or hotel chains that are visible to searchers. And so if your entire set of search results is ads from directories, the Places Sites module, the Hotel Finder, and organic results from big directories, like, you don't really even think of encountering somebody else. And so I don't know, then those small brands don't get the benefit of the nav boost, clickstream, everything that Rand and Mike probably talked about a couple months ago. So I think it's like a little dangerous to say that this is like good for consumers, because I do think that the way Google constructs the SERP, at least in Europe, where there is a law in the books that says no self-preferencing, the way Google is constructing the SERP makes it problematic for smaller sites of all stripes to compete. So,
one of the things that we saw in Europe is that on the right panel of the profile page, you would have these sponsored links to aggregators. You've seen them, the different
this is
prices
true in the US. Same interface,
right.
for hotel.
Right,
Google
Expedia, Hotels.com, whatever, TripAdvisor, and these are ads essentially. And then the user is looking at a particular hotel. They click on an aggregator, and they go to a page that isn't the profile page of the hotel. It's a SERP that has the hotel as part of it. But these aggregators are doing a kind of arbitrage or monetizing those. And this is a sort of a side note, but the prices are probably being impacted by this behavior, by this whole sort of system, and we're probably paying for it as consumers. And I don't know to what extent that's. I mean, this is not an argument against brands, but it's just an argument about how this whole system is set up.
Yeah, there was something you said, David, that I wanted to definitely ask you about photos. So, photos, I feel like, is a very misunderstood concept in the local SEO world. People hear photos are great, and then you've got things like, garage door companies adding 300 photos to their Google business profile of a door. Like, I kid you not, I see this all the time, right? So, I wanted to just clarify. You said photos are really important in healthcare. So, I have a couple questions. Were photos way more prominent for healthcare, for example, than legal/storage? And then second question, what type of photos are you talking about? Are you talking about like photos of procedures, like a plastic surgery photo of like a face before and after? Are you talking like photos of doctors, or what types of photos were these?
Greg, do you want to take that or you want me to?
Sure, I can go. So with self storage, it was the exterior and it was the units, right? So people wanted to get a physical sense of the space. With doctors, it was the provider, it was the people in the clinic, right? You often saw the people working there, the doctors, and then the admins and the staffing. Individual photos of the doctors. They want to see, gender is very important in healthcare, right? We were looking in a category where women are the primary uh, patients, and women want to see pictures of women doctors, and they don't want to see stock photography. There were a lot of
That's
sort
the
of
big take across the board. No, like stock photography, throw it out of your marketing toolkit. Not
and
good.
yeah, exactly. And they want to see pictures of lawyers. They want to see the people that they are going to be talking to and working with. There wasn't a lot of talk about except in some isolated cases, there wasn't a lot of discussion that I remember about the aesthetics of the photography, of the real photography. But the photograph has to be good enough to convey what they're trying to convey. Here's the clinic. Here are the people. Here's the doctor. Did that answer the question, Joy? David, do you have
Yeah.
anything to add?
Was there any other demographics you saw that people were specifically looking for? Like you mentioned, gender is a big
Well,
one for doctors, which makes sense.
I think in a couple of isolated cases, and we have no way of knowing this because we don't see the people who are doing the searches. We hear them and we watch their behavior. I think that ethnicity was a factor in a couple of cases, at least. So for some people, they're going to be interested in a doctor of their background or their culture, but we didn't see that, as a consistent thing. But
Yeah,
with
and I
women, it was definitely consistent.
I was going to say, I do think quality definitely mattered. I remember, I actually don't even remember which vertical this was, but like two or three GBPs I remember had very low, like the business owner had uploaded a photo of the exterior of their storefront, whatever category this was, and it was very poor. It was poorly lit. It was a poor quality, poor resolution photo, and that those consumers immediately moved on to the
Yeah,
next
yeah, yeah.
option. And so I do think that quality matters. You can't just go out there with your iPhone on a cloudy day at 5 in the
Yeah,
afternoon
yeah.
and take a shot. Like this is something that you should be investing in. And importantly, distributing those photos, not just to your, like, I think a lot of business owners probably just put the photos on their website, they put them on social media, and that's the end of it. Like putting your best photo as your cover image on GBP and uploading multiple photos when people click that, they can scroll through. Certainly for restaurants, made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And also, if there's directories that are getting all this play, do not forget about those directories,
Right.
right? Like we're publishing this on Monday, so it's not on our site yet. But like, if I'm a hotelier in the EU, Booking.com is the first place I'm uploading photos because it is getting you have the best chance of getting views
Yep.
of that photo on Booking.com. So don't ignore where your consumers are engaging when you think about where you're putting these assets that you're hopefully hiring a professional to help you with.
Yeah. I didn't mean to suggest that the quality of the photograph doesn't matter. You should think about the photograph as your brand. Every photograph is your brand, and you should optimize that to put the best foot forward in terms of the way you want your brand to appear.
But just to clarify, volume of photos isn't so much what you should be looking at. It's just
No,
like make sure your team is represented and that people
Quality.
can see.
yeah.
Yeah, got
Yeah.
it.
I would
Yeah.
say,
Okay.
and we saw so much engagement with photos in hotels, and actually we'll be publishing what the photos were of, on Monday. I actually don't even remember off the top of my head, but rooms were number one. The
Sure.
lobby was number two, bathrooms were number three, something like that, right? And then kind of on down the list. But people would browse like maybe a dozen photos, and then they'd kind of have a sense of what the place was, right? So like you don't need 300 photos. I don't think people are going all the way that far down.
But you do need enough, right? And what that number is not entirely clear. I know we're coming up against time, but one of the things that we did see repeatedly is people would go to the business profile, and then they would get into the photos, and they would page through the photos, photo. They would look at a lot of photos until they got a sense of what the business was like or what the place was like.
Yeah.
And so you know, one photo, two photos, three photos, probably not enough. 1,000 photos, too many. Not, you know, it's there's a Goldilocks rule here, and we don't know what that is off the top of our heads.
Sure. All right. So I know we're coming to the end here. I've got a bunch of questions queued up. I'm going to kind of rapid fire at you guys and see how many we can get through. Before I do that, just a quick reminder, check out Nerdy Nuts, and Richard will put the promo code up again so you guys can get 10% off. All right. Here are some questions. I have a couple people here asking about home services. Any insight into that particular industry on like review volume, things that people should be aware of?
Go to Croatia in October.
That was the study. That was the study.
We will be publishing that in conjunction with Cinda, but Greg is going to be releasing those findings exclusively in Croatia. So
that was a home improvement study.
No sneak peeks. They just have to wait.
No sneak peeks.
All right. Sorry, guys. Next question. Were you targeting companies who are aware of Google Business Profile traffic? Is it worth to get people, actually, hold on. You're a plumber, but people do not see you. Do you want to be, I'm actually not sure I understand this question.
I'm not sure I understand that either.
Okay, we'll skip that and go to a different one. In self-storage, did branding seem to appeal more than amenity-focused advertising? Or did the big brands like Public Storage, CubeSmart, etc., kind of attract all of those clicks?
So the short answer is a variety of factors played into people's clicks. Brand was definitely a big one. Price was another one. Title tags with prices, discounts, first month free, X% off. That was a big driver of clicks. And then in some cases, amenities was a factor. Amenities was less of a factor than brand and attractive title tags with pricing and discounts in them. That's the short answer.
All right, this is a good one to end on, actually. So practical kind of takeaways from this. You're an agency. Let's say we have probably a lot of agencies listening, or we have probably a lot of in-house people representing small businesses that are marketing. How does this information that you guys are sharing change how they should be approaching their marketing? What should they be doing? What is the action item? I would like both of you to answer this. So maybe David, we'll start with you, and then Greg.
Sure. So I would two things. First of all, where should you be investing, right? So I might have said in legal and healthcare, you know, you're a small business, you're never going to outrank fill in the blank, you know, national law firm or big healthcare organization or whatever. You know, you're probably better served going for GBP than you are for organic. Well, actually, we saw a pretty long tail of organic clicks happening in healthcare and some to a lesser extent in legal. And Google is localizing more and more and more results if you're doing a good job with your website. And so you actually don't necessarily need to be, you know, you don't necessarily have to have a huge backlink profile and be doing SEO for 4 or 5 years in order to crack through into an organic position that matters, right? So that's a very tactical takeaway of like, okay, I actually do want to invest in my website. I actually do want to invest in good content. I do want to invest in localized keyword research because I know that there are places I can break in here. And so that's not necessarily something I would have predicted prior to this. You definitely want to know like what percentage of people are clicking on ads and what type of ads people are clicking on in order to, you know, put your ad dollars in the right spot. So I think that, you know, there are loads of takeaways, and that's not even considering all the qualitative stuff that we're not able to share. But like I said, that's number one in terms of like actionable tips of like, if I get someone to my website, what do they want to see? What themes should I be emphasizing? That I think is some of the best information that we've seen from our research.
Okay, the last thing I would say, because David said a lot of stuff that was really good, and we're out of time, is build your brand, build it off of Google, invest in social media, follow Joy, do what Joy is doing, get people to recognize your business. And there are a lot of places other than Google where you can build a brand, and that will benefit you on Google as people, you know, search for you, recognize you when they see you in organic results or in GBP.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Just a quick reminder, we do have a feedback form that we send out just to hear what you guys liked about the webinar, what we could do in future ones. If there's particular topics you want to hear about, let us know. I do read all these, and your feedback really matters. So make sure you subscribe to our channel to get notified about our next event. We do one of these once a month. And we also have a podcast / YouTube episode as well that we are releasing monthly, which is myself and Colin that are diving through all these tests that we've been doing at Sterling Sky. They're about an hour long as well. And I think our next one will be publishing at the end of September. So keep your eyes out for that. I'm sure we'll have lots of follow-up questions. If you have questions that didn't get answered, put them in the comments and we will do our best to answer those after the event is over as well. Thank you so much, guys, for coming. Quick reminder, where can they get a hold of you? Where can they see you if they want to reach out with anything?
Richard, put that QR code back up. nearmedia.co/subscribe.
All right, that's easy to remember.
Thanks,
Greg,
Richard.
same for you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
All right. Well, we are at time, so I'll end this. Thank you guys so much for coming, and until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.